Shumai guys, and welcome back to the Life to the Full podcast, the podcast that helps you make the most of your time here on Earth. Today is a very special episode. We have Joshua from the Art of Money Saving podcast with us. We talk about our favourite rules for the money game, side hustles, financial evangelism, investing, faith and relationships, and looking outside of ourselves. It is a wide-ranging conversation in which we cover many of the pillars of life to the full. So I do hope you enjoy, and if you do, then don't forget to check out Joshua's podcast on the art of money saving. Let's get straight into it. Well, hello, Joshua. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you so much.
It's such a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here too, and seeing you in your wonderful recording, your very glamorous recording studio.
Yeah, it's a very tiny little cupboard with some soundproofing, but it does the job. Okay, so Joshua of the Art of Money Saving podcast fame, tell me a little bit about who you are, how you got to where you are today.
Brilliant. So yes, I'm Joshua, and I was born not so far away from you in South Wales.
Lucky you.
And yes, the beautiful rustic hills of South Wales. And I had a distinct interest in music when I was a child. So by default, I've gone on to become a professional musician. I'm an opera singer, so that's my bread and butter, so to say. And the pandemic hit and all of the theatres were closed, so I started twiddling my thumbs and thought, well, what else can I start to do? So I started many little ventures, one of which is the Art of Money Saving. So I run a bi-weekly podcast now on every other Wednesday, talking about personal finance, which is really interesting to me. And you've been a guest on my podcast, and I have a real passion for this subject and sharing people's financial stories. A little bit about me. Well, I think I'm fairly frugal at heart, but I have a passion for coming up with new ideas, trying to make side hustle income, and just trying to better myself in life and to learn more, and hopefully to share what I'm learning onto other people as well.
Excellent. Now, you mentioned there that you tried a few different things during the lockdown. I just wondered, how did you decide what you were going to do? How are you going to decide what to continue and what to leave behind?
Yeah, it's hard to determine what to continue with and how long do you give if something is not going as well as planned. Do you stick with it and continue going, or do you go with something that's working a little bit better? But I think by the process of osmosis, and those lockdowns for quite a long time, that it became clear what was going well, what my strengths were, and what was not going so well. And a side note was that there was, for example, the podcast was a great source of fun for me and a hobby, but wasn't really producing an income. And that, for a long time, played on my mind, because I thought, well, I really like doing this. Should I be spending as much time as I am doing it when I had another side hustle as a communications coach, public speaking coach, which was actually making me some money, and I enjoyed that quite a lot as well. So over time, that's become a little bit more clear and defined about how do you use my time, but it wasn't a clear-cut decision.
Interesting. So you're kind of rolling a little bit with the punches, seeing what works, and going with that, and going with a bit of enjoyment as well.
I think so. Flexibility was key, and that time was so uncertain anyway that it was a very strange time. But it's funny how it feels like a long time. Well, it was a long time ago now, but the effects of being locked down to your home had a profound effect on my career. And whilst I'm back to being an opera singer now, prior to that, up till 2020, that's all I did. I was an opera singer, and now I have lots of different ventures as well, which I really enjoy. So I'm going away to Sweden next week to do a 2-month stint, and it's just wonderful knowing that if I have a day off from my rehearsals, I've got all of these different projects that I can get stuck into, and that keeps me very much occupied.
Yeah, that's really interesting actually, because you had obviously a career as an opera singer which kind of shut down, and then you've started all these extra things, and now you're back to your main job. You must be wondering how on earth am I going to fit all this in? Was it a case of
Yeah, it's hard. It's tough because essentially you're running. Well, I'm running two businesses simultaneously, and then a hobby podcast. I mean, that alone is a fair amount to get on with, and then you're constantly thinking. If you're thinking about social media promotion or ideas, I that is still very much a dilemma because I'm an opera singer. That's where I make my bread and butter. And perhaps sometimes I get a little bit distracted by my side hustle. I have big ideas for it and I'd love to spend much more time developing it. But sometimes I need to do my bread and butter work, and that's how it is. But I enjoy that too as well. So I'm always just playing to my strengths, but having that inner dialogue with myself, saying, "Come on, Joshua, you've got to find out what you need to do now and do it properly."
yeah, sounds like a conversation that I might be having with my wife as well. Similar kind of
Exactly.
thing. When are you going to find out what you're going to do? But
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it
I
takes
am.
time, and you got to give yourself enough time to get stuck in and to dedicate to something. But for example, the art of money saving started very broad. It was the YouTube, it was Facebook, it was Twitter, and it's narrowed down now into basically essentially the podcast. That's my one thing that I know. On every other Wednesday, I turn up, I do a podcast episode, and that's set in stone more or less. And but it took a while to get to that point where I was like, that's what it is. That's
Yeah,
all it is.
yeah. And I do look forward to it every other Wednesday. I have
Oh, that's very kind.
my gym workout in the morning on a Wednesday, and I've got you in my ear. So
Brilliant. That's the biggest compliment I can have.
so how did you come up with the name, and what are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned from doing the podcast? It could be personal lessons or financial lessons or anything.
So the name, well, I was completely winging it. I imagine at the time, I always feel like I pick names very poorly, and then about 6 months in, I was like, I would like to change the name, but then it's too late. So the lesson there is pick your name very carefully, speak to friends and family, bounce ideas off people, and ask them, do you think this is a good name? Because it's all very good having an idea in your head, but communicating it with other people is important. So I think I winged it a bit, but the name works. That's fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Biggest lessons, I think the biggest lesson for me was that I certainly wasn't, I didn't feel like I was making an impact in the first year or year and a half of doing the podcast. It was just turning up and figuring it out. And it wasn't until a little bit later on that I started to notice that the numbers really started to increase and that there's more of an audience base growing. And it was just a clear lesson that showing up, having consistency, and creating rapport with your audience is the most important thing. So if you're there, if you're turning up and they're tuning in, they're listening to your voice, people do get to know you and get to know your ideals and your thoughts on things, and that sense of familiarity is important. So if anyone was starting a venture, I would say know who you are, know what you want to say, and be consistent in that.
Hmm. I've got to say, of the many podcasts that I listen to, you have an incredible ability to just be relatable, to be likable, to have people kind of want to hang out with you. And so, we've met a few times, and every time I chat to you, I think, yeah, this Joshua character, he's a really nice guy, and that really
That's
comes
very kind.
really comes through on the podcast.
That's very kind. Yeah. But do you know what was interesting as well is that I've noticed that from taking it from a side hustle venture to a hobby changed my actions a little bit. So if it were a side hustle, I'd be thinking, right, so growth, 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 get those those big Instagram people to come on, and they might mention me, and then it'll go. And actually, I found that to be really problematic for the podcast, because I might reach out to someone who has a big, large account, and I must say that they're the biggest pain in the backsides in terms of scheduling and being punctual and replying and showing up. So I love the fact that my podcast is about everyday normal people. It doesn't matter if you have 20,000 followers on Instagram. It doesn't matter if you have one. Everyone has a financial story, and that's made consistency at the podcast so much easier, which I'm sure there's a lesson in there somewhere. I'm not exactly sure what the lesson is, but that was interesting for me.
And you've recently hit a big milestone, 100,000 downloads. That's quite something.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're pretty much at 120 now, which is surprising, because I remember doing the big 100,000 episodes, and it's almost like compounding interest, that once you build those numbers up, it starts to snowball much more and much more. So to get to 100 to 120 was almost like a good click of a finger, and that's another surprising thing for me. But essentially, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that people get value from the content that they hear. I think hearing people's stories is important.
Mm.
And I was listening through your previous episodes yesterday, and I think that the way that the style that you do it is, we need more of those voices. We need people talking about money. We need in the UK as well, for sure, and just making it relatable and making people think about how they use money in a day-to-day basis, and thinking about the future as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I can often forget about is, I am, interacting with the personal finance podcasters, the personal finance people on Instagram and YouTube, and I can fall into the trap of thinking everybody's talking about money. But it really is not the case at all, like widespread. I guess that's one of the things with the internet. You end up going down various
It's
rabbit
true.
holes.
Yeah. You do get into a false sense of security, but funny enough, something happened today which hasn't happened so far for the podcast. So I recorded an episode. It was released this morning, about teaching children the importance of money and pocket money, all those types of questions. And I finally started to think, actually, I have a friend that could really benefit from this. I should send her the episode and just say, look, the episodes here. I think this would be really great. You can read this bedtime story about money to your child. There's a book available. It's so simple to understand. And I think there's a lot of power in that. So rather than it just being for personal finance junkies, that it has the ability to reach out then to people for a wider message. And it was nice to think that happened for me this morning. So, I can send this to her, but then I do think, will she respond to that in the right way? And then I'm doubtful about myself. But if you give people the opportunity to hear it, then you've done half the job. It's then their responsibility to listen and take action.
Exactly. You've done all you can then. All you can do is, continue to produce good content which is relevant to people. And then, if it in like this specific case, you thought, yeah, this is going to be really valuable, just pointing people in the right direction. Because, if you hadn't have pointed them in the right direction, then, who knows if they would have found it or, even be
Yeah,
open to it.
that's
So, yeah,
right.
got to do what you can do.
100%.
Now, maybe we can dig a little bit deeper, because I'm doing this from a selfish point of view, trying to mine the brains of my guests. Let's talk about your side hustle as a confidence coach. How's that going? What happened? What did you? I mean, you mentioned you started it during lockdown, but I also heard you say on your podcast that you were trying to up your game this year. Is that still happening?
It's still happening, yes. And going back to my earlier point, it's the source of frustration is that as a freelancer, I don't have those set hours. So I'm constantly walking that tightrope of, today I need to learn this piece of music for 4 months' time. But in the meantime, there's this unlimited amount of options of where I could do a TikTok video or a tweet, and it's very exciting. I love it. And I've started to realize, look, the business has taken off. So I for many years, and up until now, I've been using Fiverr, which is a hosting platform, a teaching platform. They take 20%. Now, if I think about the fees that I've charged over the last 2 years, 20% of everything I've earned has gone to Fiverr. Now, that is a massive amount.
Mm.
And I would clearly rather have that to myself. Now, good on Fiverr. They provide the platform. People come to the platform. They market the platform. They do a lot of the legwork. Fair enough. But the idea now is to think, how do I start to try and market myself and get some of those clients at least for myself? And up until now, it's been a deer in the headlights moment. I can't do it. There's so many people out there. How do I start? And I think just by starting, that is enough. And I must say, a very big contributing factor as well is I've employed someone to start helping me produce content. So I send the videos to them, and he chops them up and makes them look nice. And I'm not so good at that stuff, so it's a big time saver, and that is incredibly helpful. It makes me more efficient.
That is great. I will certainly be checking in with you over the next few months to see how that's going. Looking forward to hearing how it's going. Now then, this is a season on the podcast, Life to the Full podcast, of financial health. So, have you got any stories that you like to tell to kind of open up financial topics with people in real life? So we've talked about the fact that maybe it's not something that a lot of people talk about, but do you have any? And this might be a dead end question. Who knows? But do you have any like ways of getting in there with people to talk about finances?
You put me on the spot there, and what I would say is no, I don't have a particular answer or a way of talking to people about it. I think I always try to see where that individual person is at, what their interests are, what their struggles are, and just give a little moment of a hook or an introduction that just maybe gives a little bit of intrigue. And if they want to, they can ask follow-up questions. So one example, I can remember being out for a drink with some colleagues after a show, and for some reason the topic of money came up, and I expressed an interest in that and an interest in investing and saving for your pensions. And unbeknownst to me, that conversation obviously it was a penny drop moment for someone. So they came back to me over a year and a half later saying, "Oh, that conversation that we had, can you tell me more about that? I'd like to understand more about that." And that was interesting because I'd almost forgotten about that conversation, but it had an impact on the person. However, point number two, what I'm learning in 2023, taking action is the most important step. So I eagerly replied, "Yes, I will happily tell you more about this subject, and we can just talk about it in a casual environment and just have a chat about it. When are you available?" And we couldn't make it work, and that was about 6 months ago. So no action has been taken, and therefore time moves on. And so that's the lesson for people. You've got to intrigue is all very well and good, but you've got to take action on stuff. Otherwise, nothing will happen.
Absolutely, yeah. I've toyed with a few different ways of answering the question, well, what do you do, to try and kind of spark an interest. And I say that I'm
Yeah, that's good.
retired, and it can draw some very funny looks, um, particularly when you do it over the phone and somebody can't actually see you face to face. I did it the other day, and it kind of fell dead. And I had to explain,
it's yeah.
I am still under 40. I just have taken a different route to the traditional one. So,
But that's a good one because that's how I begin my podcast. Where are you from and what do you do? What do you do is a common question that comes up all the time. And interestingly enough, I had a conversation about this yesterday with my wife, and someone asked her, "What does your husband do?" And she said, "Well, he's an opera singer." And opera singer is one of those jobs. Oh wow, that's so interesting. In the UK, there's a very positive response, but in Lithuania, for example, where she's from, there's a sense of suspicion. Oh gosh, he works in theatre. So it's very interesting how these answers provoke different reactions. And
yes.
but I like the idea of you. You say I'm retired. that could or could not provoke an extra question, a follow up question. That's then when you get to say what you want to say and possibly move the conversation in that direction.
Yeah, exactly. So a common response is, "What do you mean retired?" I say, "Well, I played a reasonably sensible financial game from the first, 14 years of my career, and it's enabled me to quit teaching and try and follow my dreams in some other way. It doesn't mean that
Mm.
I've completely stopped working for money or anything like that, but it's an interesting one."
I like that. I do definitely be asking some follow up questions if that were the case for me.
Excellent. I describe getting on top of your finances as a game. And I think, in fact, the first time maybe not the first time, but um, listening to your podcast, Andy Hart said that
Mm,
everybody's playing the money game. And I kind
mm.
of stole that and thought, yeah, that's a great little hook. So everybody's playing the money game, and we can learn the rules and we can play to win. And yeah, the question is, have you got any favorite rules when playing the money game?
Well, first of all, I really like this idea of money being a game and life being a game. I saw one of those cheesy Instagram quotes the other day about you viewing life as a game. And I must say, I've never really thought about that. But if we think about all of the challenges that we face, we look at the news, there can be some very bleak moments, but viewing things almost like through the lens of a child, finding joy in all of those things, I think could be a very positive thing. So when it comes to money, which rules of the game do I like? Oh gosh, it's got to be living below your means. I think that's an important rule, maybe not the
Mm.
funnest rule. That's something that definitely was instilled to me as a child. We had second or third hand cars, which often broke down, and that was just something that was just how we were. We had clothes that were hand me down clothes, and so living below my means has always been very important to me. Something that's changed is understanding investing. That's become a big money rule part of the game for me. And I think that's
Mm.
when you're able. I don't know. I haven't played Monopoly in years, but if you know when you're playing a board game, you get to skip ahead. You get to do 4 or 5 steps in one go. Well, I think that's what investing can do. It's that compounding growth can give you the opportunity to jump ahead in a way that you wouldn't be able to just on your own abilities. And that excites me a lot. And going back to your previous question about financial evangelism, let's say, is I really like sharing that with people because I certainly feel like it's an undiscovered gem that people do not understand that investing can be for them and it can be for their personal finances and it's not just for the rich, so to say.
Yeah. And again, something that I've experienced with having these personal finance junkie lenses on, I guess, is that, I just kind of assume that everybody knows that the stock market is a reasonable place to put your money to watch it grow over time. It might go up and down in the short term, but in the long run, it's going to be, a wise thing to do. You've got index funds, the safest thing. People say, "Oh, what if I lose all my money?" Well, if you put £1,000 into the S&P 500 or a global index tracker, then you're going to need all of the companies essentially in the world to collapse at the same time for you to lose all of your money. So I just assume that's kind of common knowledge, but it really, really isn't.
No, it's true, but also there, I think there has to be a correlation between markets rising and people's enthusiasm about investing, and we definitely saw that post 2020, where we had that massive bull run where the
Mm.
markets are really accelerating very, very quickly, and you see hundreds of new accounts on Instagram sprouting up and evangelizing about the powers of compounding. And it certainly felt a lot quieter in 2022 and even into 2023 now, which goes to there must be a correlation there. And that
Oh,
can be a
yeah.
danger. That can be a danger because what we're talking about here is we're talking about a solid financial plan that can serve you best long term and not just about those quick gains. And of course, when you're talking about social media, a lot of it is about immediacy and being fast paced and delivering information quickly, and saying that you could one day be wealthy if you invest consistently into an index fund doesn't sound as exciting as be a millionaire next week, or whatever it'll be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I read somewhere that one of the biggest predictors of success is this idea of taking a long-term view on things, whether it's your finances or your fitness or your relationships, whatever it might be. You can be thinking, right, I'm going to go and hit the gym in January, get massive, and then, nothing happens. Or, you find a relationship and you think, short term, next relationship, and it doesn't, feed the soul. You need to take a long term perspective on
That's
these
right.
things. Which kind of moves me on slightly to our next question. And this podcast is called Life to the Full, and we look at 5 areas of health: our financial health, our relational health, our physical health, our mental health, and our spiritual health. And so I wanted to ask you just something along the spiritual health kind of thing, because I know you and I share a faith. We are both Christians, and so I wanted to ask, how does your faith affect your life?
It affects it in many ways. As I think about it, the way that it's affected me most over the last few years has certainly been getting married. So that's not only being married, but it's the preparation of what happened before getting married. And I think my faith made me think very carefully about who I want to share my life with. And I'm very lucky to be married to someone that's so caring and thoughtful. And yes, my faith certainly affects the way that we interact in marriage. So a priority for us both is to read the Bible and to pray with each other regularly throughout the week. And that can have a profound effect actually on how you move and navigate life. So particularly when it comes to being angry or frustrated, I'd say we're both pretty good at keeping calm and collected. But if I do get a little bit angry about something, grounding from my faith is something that really makes me see the bigger picture and say, "Oh, this isn't going to serve me well if I'm just thinking about myself." So my faith helps me think more outwardly and not so much inwardly, although my intentions mostly are to think inwardly. I'm quite a selfish person at heart, I think. However, it's great to think about other people and to find ways to do that. And I have a big interest as well in apologetics, and that's where I think my faith interests me the most. So listening to people like John Lennox and William Lane Craig and these great intellectual thinkers when it comes to Christianity, I love. I have no expertise myself when it comes to apologetics, but fascinating nonetheless.
Yeah, I've come across William Lane Craig, and he's a incredibly persuasive guy in terms of the way that he debates with people. I've seen a lot of his debates, and I think we could all benefit from that examination of our own faith and then how to kind of share that.
Yeah, it's a good point, isn't it? Because when I think about something like doing the Art of Money Saving podcast, which is very much a finance based podcast, I had someone write in and say, well, it talks too much about religion. That has little to do with money. But from my perspective, it has a lot to do with money, because I think that I have to be a steward of the money that I have, and I want to be responsible with that. And a big part of our conversation about finances as well is giving. And that doesn't come easily to me. It comes very easily to my wife. And so we're always exchanging ideas and trying to encourage each other to learn from one another there.
Yeah, I think you've mentioned 2 things there. Your faith kind of really affects what you do with your money, and your faith is like the grounding thing on which you build your relationships. And I think people just don't get in general um, the fact that spiritual health is the thing that, like, really pushes on everything else. So I've tackled this in kind of the opposite way of importance, basically, because I started with the financial health, and really finances, although they are a big deal, they are the smallest thing, the lowest rung on the ladder in terms of living a full life. You know, our health and our relationships and our spirituality are kind of increasing levels of importance, and
Mm.
from the other way around, you know, they all kind of build on that bottom one. The spiritual health is the thing that's most important, and I think I would, you know, encourage you to keep, you know, keep. I I don't think there's too much religious content in your podcast at all, but
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because you have to put yourself in the shoes of other people, and again, ask what is your core message. If your core
mm,
message, as it is for me, is to share everyday money stories from people, then if something is important to someone, as it is my faith, then that should be part of the conversation. And I think too often I think, well, what will someone think of this conversation if I say the wrong word? I
mm,
think the fact of the matter is, it'd be very, very interesting for people listening into this conversation right now that have no religion. That thought these two guys talking about their faith. That's a perspective that I've never really thought of before, and I think that's all we're wanting to achieve is to have that conversation and to show that it has an impact. And we had some premarital counselling before we got married, and we were talking to this counsellor, and she said that she counselled hundreds and hundreds of couples over her lifetime, and she said not one couple has got divorced when they are reading the Bible and then they're praying together. And there was one example of a couple that refused to do that, and they did go on to get to divorce. But I think that just goes to show that there is a sense of unity. And whilst I certainly don't agree with everything when it comes to me and my wife, but when we come back to our faith, we're always trying to find that common ground and encourage each other.
yeah, and I think when you share your life with someone on that deepest level, you know, your inner soul, you share that and you intertwine that with somebody. It I would say it's almost inevitable or obvious or whatever it might be, but it's just, again, the foundation on which you build everything. And if you've got a firm foundation, then you know you can weather a lot, should we say?
Absolutely. And trying to tie this into finances as well. So a common part of the conversation before I got married or before I started dating my wife was, for a number of years I realized I wanted to meet someone with similar values, essentially someone that shared the same faith, because I thought that that's how I want to live my life. That's I want to share my life with someone like that. And as the years went on, and there were many years of being single and trying to figure it out, it was a very difficult thing. Many people are saying, "Ah, it doesn't matter. You know, if you have faith, marry someone who's Jewish or has a Muslim faith, or it doesn't really matter." And I'm so glad that I didn't heed that advice, because being on the same page means sharing those same thoughts and weathering the storms together and walking through life as a team, which is it just gives a different perspective. It's interesting. If I go on a financial independence Facebook group and I see that someone is talking about managing their finances completely separately, that's alien to me. I'm interested in that. I want to know more about that, but I'm convicted that that's not the best plan for working together as a team, personally.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's a discussion all in itself, isn't
It,
it?
it, it is a discussion. I would personally agree with you. I know that many wouldn't.
But you can understand why, can't you? Because if there is this overlooming threat of divorce, and when you look at the stats, I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, you're almost more likely to get divorced than you are to stay together, and that's where my faith plays a real fundamental in my life, because I just know that that's not even it's not even an option. We are on the same page. We're in it for life. We're together. Come what may.
Yeah, I think. I mean, it's an important thing to have. I remember listening to Seth Godin talking about playing ice hockey, and he said, if you ever played ice hockey on a frozen lake, you will know why an ice hockey rink has like boundaries and barriers, so that you're not chasing after a puck for a mile down the lake. And having that like foundation, we are committed to staying together, and for us divorce isn't an option. It kind of is an inbuilt security then in everything else. It's an inbuilt security in your
Mm,
finances and in your relationship. You're not second guessing, thinking, oh, what if they leave, or what if they rip me off, or whatever it might be.
mm, mm.
But, yeah, interesting
Yeah,
stuff.
I like the hockey analogy there. It's a really great way of putting it.
Yeah, I've adapted that hockey uh, kind of metaphor to many areas of my life. I
Mm,
need rules which I can stick to, which constrain in some ways, but actually improve the quality of my life overall.
yeah.
I have a natural tendency to fight against rules and to, you know, question authority when it comes to rule keeping. But yeah, having rules to stop you from going in a million different directions
Mm.
is something that I've found quite helpful in many areas of my life.
Brilliant.
Right, few quicker questions potentially. Um, have you got any superpowers?
Oh
Not
my
like
gosh. I think my superpower would have to be tracking down a yellow sticker. It's like my eye can scan an entire supermarket when it comes to a yellow sticker. I mean, there are people that have more talents, but I think that's going to be one of my superpowers for sure.
if I could have a superpower, then that would be certainly in the top five.
Very good.
Excellent. What are the books that have had the biggest impact on you? Uh, if you want to give me a couple of, or one finance related and one maybe not so finance related.
Well, I'm going to throw you a curveball here and tell you a little bit about my learning style. So, when I first read this question, I was thinking, right, well, what books? I'm not a massive book reader. I love books, however, but I'm much more of an audio visual learner. And what's interesting about this question was when I was thinking about it, I couldn't really think of any books because I love podcasts. And so when I compare podcasts and books or even audiobooks, I'm always much more of a podcast guy. So even if it's something like, if we think about J.L. Collins, who wrote the book The Simple Path to Wealth, I will always recall the videos that I've watched of him or the podcasts that I've listened to with his message rather than the book. I mean, there's loads of books, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, The Simple Path to Wealth, Your Money, Your Life, things like that. But I am a podcast addict. So when it comes to UK podcasts, I'm talking about This Is Money, The Money Clinic from the Financial Times, the podcast from Pension Craft. I every day listen to podcasts. So that would be my answer, as I'm much more of a podcast person.
All right. And you mentioned off air before we started the frugal spender. Is that right?
Yeah. Brian he started his podcast, I think, tail end of 2020. Has a big TikTok account, and he used to be in debt and has some really clear ideas about what his mentality is when it comes to debt and making sure that people outside of the personal finance bubble get the message about getting your act together when it comes to your finances. So he's got a really great podcast. He does some solo episodes, some interviews as well. It's I really enjoy it. Great to listen to.
Excellent. I shall check that one out. And some of the others. I am a big podcast listener too, although I have uh, kind of applied the ice hockey metaphor to some of my podcasting listening as well. So
Yeah.
I've tried to cut down just because I find my brain is too full of stuff. and I can't create and I can't think for myself when
Very
I
wise.
have too much input.
Very wise.
It's something that I'm not the best at, because I do love podcast. Right, so next quick fire question, and again it might be a flop question. Let's have a look. Do you have anything that's concerning you in life?
I think I do. I have many things that concern me, particularly career wise. So, one thing that concerns me is that has been a big, massive shift in my career as a singer. So, I lived in Germany and Austria for many years, and I continued to work there for quite a lot of time. And of course, Brexit has come in, and that has it's a very unpopular topic, but that has been a cause for concern for me for sure, because there's many more constrictions now, restrictions on how I work as an opera singer, how I move freely through the EU. So that
Mm.
I don't want it to be a problem for me. I want to focus on positive things, but I must say beginning or end of 2022 is a very frustrating time, because spending a lot of time in paperwork now, applying for visas, and it concerns me that not there's not clear enough information for artists. So yes, I understand that people will they want to live in a country. You apply for your paperwork for 2 years or for 5 years, or if you have a spouse, fair enough, that's clear. But when you're an artist going from one country to the next for a very short period of time, getting that paperwork and understanding the local laws is annoying. So that that concerns me, because I don't know what impact that has on my future career, and potentially in danger of losing out on future work. But that's nothing I can control. So whilst it concerns me, I try to put my optimist hat on and continue. But to keep it personal finance related, what concerns me, I think, is I see my generation, so outside of the finance community, they're very concerned about the cost of living crisis and what's happening at the moment. And I'm thinking 30, 40 years beyond that, and thinking, well, what's going to happen with your pension? And
Mm.
for artists in particular in the UK, they're probably not even thinking about pensions. There's maybe getting onto the property ladder is more of a priority, but since we're not employed, you're having to make all of those pension contributions yourself, or more likely making none at all. So just a wider conversation about money could be helpful, and that does concern me a little bit.
Yeah. What a wise man once said, and usually when I say a wise man once said, I'm talking about me, but in this case, I'm not. My father-in-law said to me, I asked him if there was one piece of advice that you could give me that I can take into any area of my life, what would it be? And he said, look as far ahead as you can into the future and plan for that.
Mm,
So
that's
yeah,
very sound advice. That's very sound advice.
very sound advice from my father-in-law. So yeah, thinking about a pension, and what is there going to be a state pension? Who knows? What's it going to look like? Maybe very different to today. So yeah, getting your finances in order now to have that long-term view. Yeah, very, very important.
Yeah, and employed people will be able to take advantage of pensions that their employer gets them into, and they will also match the contributions that you have, etc. So that's great, and there's no question that's a fantastic thing. But I'm in the freelancer world, and that's definitely an area of concern, because I just know that people are living hand to mouth, and that's not even a question. So I think, how are they going to survive in
Mm.
40 years time? How's that going to look? But yeah, education, right?
Education, education, education. Every is a school day. Okay,
Yes.
and now to the most important question of the whole podcast. What does living life to the full mean for you?
Living life to the full for me means having a variety of, whether it's hobbies or tasks or interests that are very different, that all bring you a sense of satisfaction. So something active, maybe a sport, for example, something passive, something educational, something spiritual, very much like the five pillars that you have for your podcast. I think each part plays a very important role. And as I mentioned, going full circle at the beginning of the podcast, I have the tendency to look much more inwardly, and anything that can help me look outside of myself is a very good thing. And I think that does help you live life more fully if you're not so absorbed by your own thoughts and feelings, but try to help out other people when you can. Not saying that I do it all the time. It's a work in progress.
Yeah, very, very wise. Thank you, Joshua. Right, just before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to talk about that I haven't asked you about, or where do people come to find you?
People can come to find me, the Art of Money Saving podcast. You'll find it on Google Podcast, Spotify, iTunes, anywhere that you find your podcast. Just type it in. I'll be there. Episodes every other Wednesday.
Right, well, thank you very much, Joshua, for coming on the Life to the Full podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I will encourage people to go and listen to the Art of Money Saving podcast. It is a fantastic resource for all things finance related. So keep up the good work.
Thank you so much. Take care.
So that was my interview with Joshua from the Art of Money Saving podcast. He is an incredible guy, really lovely chap. I absolutely had a blast chatting to him, and there was a lot that hit the editing floor, which we didn't have time for today. But yeah, he's a great guy to chat to. I just wanted to pick up some takeaways from this podcast, the key takeaways. Number 1, things take time, and being consistent and connecting with your listeners is the most important thing.
I didn't feel like I was making an impact in the first year or year and a half of doing the podcast. It was just turning up and figuring it out. And it wasn't until a little bit later on that I started to notice that the numbers really started to increase and that there's more of an audience base growing. And it was just a clear lesson that showing up, having consistency, and creating rapport with your audience is the most important thing.
Key takeaway number 2. Little conversations can make a difference, but only if you take action.
Taking action is the most important step. So I eagerly replied, yes, I will happily tell you more about this subject, and we can just talk about it in a casual environment and just have a chat about it. When are you available? And we couldn't make it work, and that was about 6 months ago. So no action has been taken.
Key takeaway number 3. Investing is a superpower which anyone can benefit from. If you spend your time learning about investing, it can make your life a whole lot easier.
If you know when you're playing a board game, you get to skip ahead, you get to do 4 or 5 steps in one go. Well, I think that's what investing can do. It's that compounding growth can give you the opportunity to jump ahead in a way that you wouldn't be able to just on your own abilities.
Key takeaway number 4. Choosing a spouse who's on the same page as you when it comes to life values, and particularly from a spiritual health standpoint, is exceedingly important. It's even more important than finding someone who's on the same page financially. It can have an incredible effect on your life, the person that you choose to spend your life with. And so having them on the same page spiritually is really important. I would encourage you to consider that very carefully when it comes to choosing a spouse.
And I think my faith made me think very carefully about who I want to share my life with. Yes, my faith certainly affects the way that we interact in marriage. So a priority for us both is to read the Bible and to pray with each other regularly throughout the week. And that can have a profound effect actually on how you move and navigate life.
So there we have it. Season 2, financial health, over and done with for now. I am very much looking forward to Season 3 when we're going to be looking at physical health. But in the meantime, look out for some in-between episodes to keep your ears tingling and your minds thinking about how you can live life to the full. Thanks so much for being here with me and Joshua. And if you can, please leave a review. See you next time. Peace out.
You're back. The podcast is back, and that's wonderful news.